Hey,
Hello.
start my video. I'm not actually Gino.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to change. Oh, here I go.
I can see you, so.
Not Gino. There we go. Yeah, my other account that I have through work is the free one, so it caps my meetings at 40 minutes.
Right.
Which is weird. I thought we had I assume we had some corporate whatever, but I guess that only certain people's accounts are on that level. Like I don't personally schedule a lot of meetings. I just join other people's meetings.
Right. Well, I know WebEx has changed their stuff again as of the beginning of July.
Okay.
And so a lot of things are, again, unless you've got the right kind of account, then they're cutting them off.
Have you ever done Google like Meetup or Meet or whatever it's called?
I haven't done that. I think the kids have. They actually also use Discord.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
A lot
Discord's like
like
a
the
gaming
senior
thing.
high is using that, and then our kids actually have a sibling thing where they play games and stuff together.
Okay.
They've set up.
See waiting room. Oh, there's multiple people in there. Admit. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It's all in your browser, and it works pretty much like Zoom. Like you get like a Brady Bunch view where there's like different tiles with each person's face. And I thought it was okay. I don't know. I guess it works in other browsers besides Chrome, but it worked pretty well in Chrome.
Well,
yeah. There's Jerry. Are you guys both the same at home?
About 6 weeks ago, my sister introduced to using the thing in Messenger.
Mm-hmm. You there? Oh,
yep.
Am I cutting out?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm in my back bedroom, so if I start to cut out, I'm gonna move and I'll have to kick Nathan out of a different bedroom.
Do you want to assign someone else as host in case you get kicked off, or if you want?
Yes, I will do Jim and make him co-host. There we go. Oh, there's something in chat. Oh, cool. Okay. Actually, I'll go and grab those links from my Realm post as well. I gotta do this. I don't want to let Zoom is taking over my screen. There we go. Come back over here. Chat. How do I get back to the waiting room? Participants, maybe? Oh, there it is.
Just screen capture this pictures.
It's the first time I've actually run one. Oh, participants don't mute themselves. Mute, play sound. Lock meeting. How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Hey, how's Gary doing, Kathy? Is he super busy?
This week he has staff meetings with the school.
Okay.
Which is not his favorite thing on Zoom. He hates the computer, and so he's working at Seton and then doing that too. So this is a full week for him.
Okay. How are things at the hospital?
No bueno.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're they're not staffed appropriately. They don't have enough people to take care of everybody. So now is not a good time to be in the ICU
Yeah.
if you have any opportunity to miss it. Don't go
Yeah.
there.
Is it like they have beds but not enough staff?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So one thing you told me a few weeks ago was was probably the scariest thing I've heard so far, is that, you know, if you are in ICU and you have to be on a ventilator, not only do you have to have the bed in the ICU and the ventilator, but you also have to have a nurse and staff who know how to run the machine.
Mhm.
And, you know, sometimes he has a patient that has 30 machines, not vents, but just different kinds of machines that are keeping them alive, doing different things. And a few weeks ago, he told me that they're talking about what do they do when they have more patients and staff, and they were talking about moving ICU nurses into other places where they have these patients. They're having to take over different units because there's not enough ICU beds. And so they're going to have, like, where the ICU nurse is staffing the unit, but basically in charge of non-ICU nurses who are taking care of the patients who need ICU care.
Mhm.
And so that's pretty scary. And
It's like
then
they're just going to get
yesterday,
them. You're like, here you go.
yeah, I mean, I don't even know what that looks like. But yesterday he had 2 patients that were basically one-on-one patients. They needed one ICU nurse to take care of them. They were so sick, and he had 2. Because, yeah, so they're just having to do the best that they can.
Yeah, my brother, this is like a week old, but my brother's girlfriend is an OR nurse for a group of doctors that do like back or brain and spine surgery. So it's not, I think they occasionally do some emergency stuff, but mostly it's scheduled. And they were told, like, yeah, you can't do it in town. So I think they were going to basically start doing surgeries in not Dripping Springs, somewhere farther out, Marble Falls maybe, at some hospital out there, and just, you know, drive out there every day and do their stuff there because they have enough space.
Yeah, it makes sense. My sister-in-law's an ICU nurse in New Braunfels or San Marcos, and they aren't even keeping COVID patients. They're sending them all into the city. But that's probably going to have to stop at some point because there's not going to be enough space for them.
Here or to like San Antonio?
Here.
Here, okay.
I think here. Because I think she's at a Seton hospital. I don't think that there are Seton hospitals in San Antonio.
I have no idea.
I don't think so. Yeah, so it's just crazy.
Do you think we should wait a little more or just get started? I don't know who all was going to show up. I'm recording it if that's okay. So if anybody wants to watch it, they can. Watch us chat about COVID.
If they don't have anything else better to do.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I can kick it off. So I thought I would read the first a couple paragraphs from the wiki page for social justice, and then just see whether you guys think that's accurate or if there's other things that you've heard of that people sort of talk about when they talk about that, or if you have personal things that you consider to be part of that in terms of how you understand it. So let me read that. It's pretty short. First couple paragraphs there. Social justice is a concept of fair and just relations between the individual and society as measured by the distribution of wealth, opportunities for personal activity, and social privileges. In Western, as well as in older Asian cultures, the concept of social justice has often referred to the process of ensuring that individuals fulfill their societal roles and receive what was their due from society. In the current global grassroots movement for social justice, the emphasis has been on the breaking of barriers for social mobility, the creation of safety nets, and economic justice. Social justice assigns rights and duties in the institutions of society, which enables people to receive the basic benefits and burdens of cooperation. The relevant institutions often include taxation, social insurance, public health, public school, public services, labor law, and regulation of markets to ensure fair distribution of wealth and equal opportunity. Interpretations that relate justice to a reciprocal relationship to society are mediated by differences in cultural traditions, some of which emphasize the individual responsibility towards society and others the equilibrium between access to power and its responsible use. Hence, social justice is invoked today while reinterpreting historical figures such as Bartolomé de las Casas in philosophical debates about differences among human beings, in efforts for gender, ethnic, and social equality, for advocating justice for migrants, prisoners, the environment, and the physically and developmentally disabled. So there's a lot of stuff. Thoughts on that? I'll paste the link to the wiki page into the chat too.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as what I've always defined social justice in my mind is just people being treated fairly and equally. Yeah, I don't read this and think, oh, well, that's not what I was thinking, or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like this pretty much matches up with how I've heard people use the term. But I do think that depending on who I'm talking to, people will have a different like emphasis on what they are talking about. Like there's a lot of stuff in those paragraphs, that could potentially be considered some sort of a social justice issue. And usually, like, I don't find myself talking to people and they're talking about sort of just the big bucket of things. It's more like, hey, here's this thing that we're talking about, and oh, by the way, this is a social justice issue, or somehow that comes up in conversation. Like, you know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
Well, it seems to me that a lot of times people define it, the way they want to, according to their politics or some other, view of life or worldview or something that they have. And so for some people, social justice is going to be viewed hugely negative. Mm-hmm. It's calling into alignment a whole bunch of things that maybe you don't agree with. And then just the opposite is true for other folks. I guess just to relate a quick little story, I was watching an interview with John Kasich, who ran for president, I guess in 2016. And he said that his daughter made him go see the movie Detroit, which I haven't seen, but apparently it's might be a hard movie to watch. He said there were very few people in the auditorium watching, but when it was over, he said he was very strongly affected. And he came out in the lobby, and there were two middle-aged black women there, and he went over to them and said, "Doesn't this make you look forward to a time when Jesus will come back and justice will be established?" And they all hugged and cried. Mm-hmm. I guess I relate that to say that for some people, justice means something different than it does to others. For some people, justice means taxing me and taking away my money, and for other people, it means give me put me on a level playing field.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was trying to tease out when I mentioned like end goals versus implementation. I feel like people who are strongly critical of social justice, sort of in general, who look at the redistributive aspects of it, like probably agree with the end goal, because a lot of times when people try to describe it, they do it in really general terms, like equality of opportunity, or we want everybody to have the same chances, and stuff like that, social mobility. But the question is like, how do you get there? So, and I think that people can disagree on how to get there, but I feel like there's some amount of agreement on kind of the end goals. Like people sort of feel like people should be treated fairly. You know, there's this concept of fairness. Now they may define fairness differently, but we have this kind of notion of that, and we kind of want people to have equality of opportunity. Like we don't want people to be hamstrung because of, you know, you're being born poor or whatever. But then we get into the, like, how do you actually make that happen? And that's where the disagreement comes.
And defining what equal is becomes hard.
Sure.
So you could have two neighbors. You provide them both seeds to grow vegetables. They both have the same amount of land, same amount of sun, same amount of rain. One of them goes out and pulls weeds. The other one decides not to. One has a great harvest. The other one doesn't. The one who doesn't says, well, for there to be social justice, you got to give me some of what you have.
Mm.
And he's like, but wait a minute, I went out and worked. You didn't. Why should I give you some of mine? It becomes hard. You know, was that equal opportunity? Is that where the justice part is? Is it equal returns? Is that where you define the justice? You know.
Well, the other thing about it that I think is really tough is even if you grant the goal of equal opportunity, I mean, we're never going to have it. I mean, it's literally impossible because we're raised by parents, and some people's parents are not good parents, you know? Oh, wait, my internet connection is going. I'm going to switch rooms. Let me go kick Nathan out of the other room. Oh, good. He's already gone. Sorry about that. Oh, so yeah, all I was saying is that, you know, even if you put in place these systems that mitigate sort of financial differences between people, you can't really totally level the playing field because some people are going to have parents who are really involved and are, you know, teaching them things, reading to them, and, you know, providing them good role models and that kind of thing. And other people aren't. And you can't, short of taking every child away from a parent and putting them in an institution, you're not going to make everybody the same. So that's, I guess, kind of not frustrating, but like, you know, it's kind of a pie in the sky goal. Like, you're never going to get all the way there, even if you try.
So I think there was part of what you read talked about removing barriers.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you know, someone may have barriers that they've constructed on their own. You know, they've decided not to go weed their garden. That's a barrier that came from inside rather than imposed on them. I think as a society, we can go and we can say, are we imposing barriers on somebody? We should remove those. But we shouldn't try and compensate for their own self-imposed barriers. So that what you were bringing up, somebody whose environment that they were raised in was suboptimal. You know, I think it's a good social justice thing to say, hey, that was wrong. Let's try and address that. But I think part of what bothers me is a lot of people who at least ones that I've talked to who talk about social justice, want to blindly level the playing field, which brings about I'm trying to think of the right word. Essentially, you lose incentive.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so there's if the amount of effort you have to put in does not relate to the amount of return you get, then you're like, well, why should I work harder than anybody else? I remember hearing a story about, you know, a a professor who said he was going to average everybody's grades and everyone was going to get the same grade. And eventually everybody failed because the ones who tried hard figured it's not worth it.
Mhm.
And eventually the average came down to where everybody failed.
Yeah.
And so there's still got to be some way to have incentive without having barriers. And I admit that it's beyond me though. I don't know how to do that.
Well, I want to agree that there's definitely, in my experience, there's definitely an extreme version of this where, like you said, we want everybody to have exactly the same amount of stuff, I guess, to oversimplify it. And I do agree with the problems inherent there. I guess one thing that I think of, or that when I sort of think about this particular issue of, people who, like you give the example of not weeding your garden, sort of a grace thing. Like you can imagine somebody who maybe got in trouble with the law at some point and they have a criminal record, but now they've paid their debt to the society and they're on the straight and narrow. And like, to what extent do we want that person to be hamstrung by legitimate mistakes that they made earlier in their life? Like, I know that there's always going to be some consequence. Like, you can't get away from there not being a consequence, but we can sort of structure things to where there's more or less. Or like, not even a criminal example, but like maybe somebody just, doesn't have a good home situation, doesn't have parental supports, and they screw around and flunk out of high school and drop out. And then they realize at some point in their young adult life that I want to support myself. I want to, I'm ready to work hard. Like, what do we want that person, what opportunities do we want that person to have to support themselves? And, that kind of question, like, anyway.
So, I can think of some examples where, like the ability to file Chapter 11
Mm-hmm.
is an example of a way to say, hey, you mismanaged things, you got yourself into trouble. And Chapter 11 is a way to say, okay, let's clean the slate so you can start over. And I had a neighbor who had to file Chapter 11 because he bought a house, and unbeknownst to him, the foundation was built improperly, and the house essentially became worthless when the foundation separated.
Mm-hmm.
So now he's got this mortgage for a worthless house. And there was no way out of that. And so he filed Chapter 11 and started over and dealt with the bad credit from having filed Chapter 11, did the right things, worked his way up, got his credit back, is doing great now. Mm-hmm. I also know of somebody else who had a business. They took their money and sheltered it somehow, then filed Chapter 11 so they wouldn't have to pay their creditors, and then recovered the money that they'd sheltered. And essentially it was, they took advantage of a construct that was designed to help people who legitimately were in a hard place and needed help. And he just used it for a financial advantage. He took advantage of a loophole. And there's all kinds of stuff that we look at in our tax system where there have been things put in for good purposes that get misused. And that's what, people get upset. The rich have the advantage of using all these tax loopholes and maybe using them not the way they were intended, and that's not fair. So every time we try and do something to do social justice, there are uncouth people who will take advantage of that, which sort of makes you get frustrated and not want to attempt social justice anymore, because when you do it, it gets taken advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That is that does sound like a misuse of Chapter 11. Like, my dad probably should have filed bankruptcy in the 80s. He was a home builder, and he built 2 houses with his own money right before the real estate crash in the 80s in Texas, and couldn't sell them, and that basically had to pay 3 mortgages, ours plus the 2 houses, and for 2 or 3 years. He finally broke down and rented them, and then eventually sold them. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's tough to know what to do about misuse of things. I mean, you can sort of blame the people who wrote those policies, and maybe they were naive, or they didn't sort of foresee all the things they should have foreseen. There's also kind of an argument that I see made for people who want to do this kind of thing, but they're like, basically it's a anti-complexity argument. Like, the more complexity you build into these kind of benefits, not necessarily Chapter 11, but other things, the more overhead it is, and the more likely that there's going to be fraud. And that applies to taxes as well as, social programs. So some people are like, we should just, instead of having like XYZ ABC programs, we should just cut people a check and then let them spend the money how they see fit, instead of giving a voucher for this, a voucher for that. Everything's mean tested.
Right.
But that's kind of like, I don't want to get too far into like the policy weeds here. That's not really what we're trying to talk about.
It's along similar lines. I know people who have they sell their food stamps to buy stuff other than food.
Yeah.
And then they complain that they don't have any food. Well,
Yeah.
it's because you made a choice.
Yeah.
And that's I think one of the issues you run into is like, when you're trying to be, you're trying to serve and provide my vacuum decided to come back in the room. I'm going to mute and let someone else talk.
Are you have a Roomba?
Yeah. So one of the things that I was talking with our boys about earlier in the week is that, when we talk about opportunities and things being equal or fair, or what is justice, and when we look at the way God does justice, he doesn't give everybody exactly the same thing.
Okay.
There are some things that we have that are very similar. That, yes, he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. But if you think about it from a parenting perspective, what one child needs and what is best for that one child is not what the other child needs and what's best for that child. So that increases that whole complexity there too, because what does who need and who's supposed to do what for whom, it does become very complex. But I really think that the whole idea of that not everybody needs to have the same thing, or quote the equal opportunity, that's part of the way God operates. So trying to give everybody exactly the same opportunity, or give everybody hand everybody a check of the same amount, that's not necessarily what's going to be.
Well, the check thing is just
right. I know that's an oversimplification, but
yeah. Well, sort of. I mean, the people who argue for that, their thinking is that the individuals are best suited to decide what their needs are. So instead of being very prescriptive and having like food stamps plus a housing voucher plus something else, like you just sort of give people, you add all those up and you say, here, not everybody gets the same amount, but like, we're just going to give you this money. And if you want to use it to buy food, you can buy food. If you want to pay your rent with it, you can pay your rent. You can divvy it up how you want. But that's a specific policy thing. I think to touch on what you were saying, I think in terms of what social justice people are talking about, the kinds of opportunity that they're talking about are not, I don't know that God, in sort of the ideal situation, is for people to have different opportunities there. Like, I know that we live in a broken world, and that, because of that, you're going to have home situations that are not good. You're going to have people who are poor. But like, the kind of opportunities that that I think people are talking about is stuff like, the opportunity to get an education. And I'm not necessarily agreeing with them that those opportunities don't exist. I'm just saying the argument is that these are opportunities that everybody should have. Sort of the opportunity to, be a full actor in the political process, or, the labor market, whatever it is that their thing is. So I kind of feel like that's a good goal, even if we're not sure how to get there.
So I think one of our challenges is, how do you define what's just?
Yeah.
If you look at the couple of parables in the Bible, one parable, the parable of the talents, the one they were given talents, and one of them came back and he buried it. Another one had invested, made a little, and one other one had made a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when God then rewarded them, he did not reward them equally.
Sure.
And on the other hand, you have the generous landowner who hired people in the morning, paid them a day's wage, went out and hired people at noon, paid them a day's wage, went out and hired him just before closing time and paid him a day's wage, because they needed a day's wage in order to be able to feed their families. So we got two parables that seem to have opposite outcomes. So what is just? And we're in a society that doesn't want to have any kind of absolutes. There's no absolute truth, no absolute right. Everything's relative. And so I think this is where we're going to struggle with now. How do we, if we want to have social justice, we got to define what's just.
Sure. Yeah.
Can I talk?
Yeah,
Sure.
Go for it.
So I've been thinking about this the last few days, just with the whole school thing. I think that AISD today, and Jay, you probably know better than anybody here, that they said that the first 3 weeks will be online, right?
Know about this?
Excuse me?
Wait, who was that?
That the first 3 weeks will be online, and then they'll go from there, right? Well, for me, that totally works, because we are able to do that, right? But all of my children have a computer. All of my children have access to Wi-Fi. All of my children have two parents who are living at home. I don't have a job right now, basically, but we're still able to make it. Like, we're not paying our mortgage right now. And that's something that that not everybody has. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not saying, I guess I'm just saying that it's not all equal. And so it seems like, okay, this is a great decision. And I think, like, in my mind, I think that it is. I read something today about, if kids go back to school, this is how many people could potentially die. Mm-hmm. Not just children, but also staff, people who worked at the school, teachers. There are lots of adults there, not just kids. There's a lot of health ramifications for that, but there's also a lot of educational ramifications, like, some of these kids are just not going to get school. And so it feels like that's not equal and that's not fair. And I don't know the answer to it, but I just feel like in a lot of ways, that's kind of how our society is set up. And I think that unless you've been on the end of not having enough, it's really hard to understand that. Like, I was thinking, when Jerry was talking, I was thinking about this, thinking about myself. And, most of you don't know my whole family story, and that's okay. But basically, my parents were divorced when I was young. And one time when I was older, I had gone to see my mom with my kids, and my mom is on welfare. Well, I think she worked at the time, but her husband was disabled and they received a lot of benefits from the government. And the very first thing I saw when I walked in their house was this huge TV. I've never seen a TV that big in my life, and all these gaming systems in front of it. And then she went to feed us, and she was feeding us boiled hot dogs, which was fine. I'm not like, whatever. And then I went to look and there was a cockroach crawling across the table. Like, it was so bad, poverty. I would have never stayed there. And then in the freezer, there were steaks that probably the government paid for, right? And so, like, there's this, it doesn't seem fair in a lot of ways. Like, okay, they should have used this opportunity to, I don't know, clean their house, take care of their family. And here they are buying steaks, which I couldn't even afford. And these huge TVs and gaming systems, but it's just like a cycle of poverty. And God in his graciousness got me out of that, because it's like a whole long story, but in my senior year of high school, another family took me in. And so I had been living with my stepmom, who was beaten, and we were living in a shelter. And then we were living in a hotel. It's a crazy story, but we were living in a hotel for several months. I was working at a restaurant. She was working at an attorney's office. And a Christian man where I worked, heard about my story and just started praying, God, what do you want me to do? And him and his wife took me in and gave me this whole chance of a life. Like, when some people hear my story, they're like, it's so shocking, because you seem like a normal person, like you went to college and you have a degree, and you're not, I don't know, you didn't get held back. And it was a bunch of things. It was that God provided a family for me that gave me something that I didn't deserve, like they took me in, but I also worked hard. And I think, like, when I think about social justice, I just think, like, not putting our feet on somebody's neck to hold them down. And of course, they're going to do whatever, like, we can't control what the people with the talents did. They, that's their responsibility, but he still gave them all the same thing. What they did with it was different, and we can't really control that, but there are some things that we can control. And not holding somebody back or having laws that keep somebody down isn't giving them a chance to see what they might do with their talents. Anyways, there's my little story.
That's wild. I never knew that about you.
It's crazy. You'll have to hear the whole story sometime. It's crazy, but.
So I had a friend in junior high whose mom, or basically their family, was on, they were, I guess, in subsidized housing. And I guess this was in the late 80s. So I guess they still had like old style welfare before the Clinton reforms. And his mom, so the dad wasn't in the picture. I think he had left. I don't think he was paying child support, maybe. She was a nurse, and then she got diagnosed with MS. So she couldn't be a nurse anymore because she couldn't do needles. Had 3 boys, and I was good friends with him in junior high, and I'd go over to their apartment, which was a cruddy little apartment. And they did not have a lot of stuff. I'm not contradicting your story by saying this. I'm just giving an example of, like, I feel like that was a family where they did everything right, and they really benefited from, I don't know what they would have done if they hadn't had assistance. I remember when I was over there one time, I had really bad allergies, and I asked them for a Kleenex, and they're like, "Oh, we don't have Kleenex. You have to use toilet paper." And I said, I don't know. I think I said something to my friend like, "You don't have Kleenex?" And he's like, "No, we don't have Kleenexes because we can't afford a box of Kleenex. Use the toilet paper." And I'm like, "Okay, sorry. I'll use the toilet paper." But that's how clueless I was as a kid. Like I didn't understand that level of hardship where you can't afford a box of Kleenex. So, I don't know where I was going with that story, but that guy, I'm pretty sure my friend, I kind of lost touch with him after junior high, but I'm pretty sure he probably had some need-based money when he went to college. And now he's like a professor of something or other. Like he went all the way and got his PhD. And so he's like a total success story, which is not the case for everybody. But, I don't know what opportunities where that guy would have ended up, like if his family hadn't had some kind of help, when he was younger. I guess the main thing that I was, trying to go for is just to see if we can look at the big
What do you do?
amorphous thing of social justice and sort of pick out things that we feel like we can resonate with as believers, even if we take issue with some of the specific kind of policies that people push or sort of extreme versions of social justice where they want to make everybody the same. I think you can say like, I think it's a good goal that people are treated the same by the criminal justice system, for instance, regardless of the color of their skin. And I think we can say that without necessarily granting that there are abuses happening, even though I kind of think there are. But you can say, look, I don't know. I'm not a statistician. I haven't gone on. I can't tell you yes or no this is happening, but I'll tell you what, if it is happening, it's not right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you kind of sidestep you don't have to argue with somebody about whether or not X or Y is happening. I mean, they may want to, but you can say, hey, I affirm this, that people should be treated the same under the law regardless of the color of their skin. We agree on that. And that's kind of you can start from a place of agreement with that eventual goal. And you can apply that to other issues too, like whatever the particular social justice issue is, if it's something where you agree on the end goal, if you think it's a valid thing to shoot for. What do we got over here? Does that seem reasonable? Or does anybody not think that's reasonable? I mean, I'm fine with, I'm just one participant in this. I'm not, definitely not trying to preach here.
Sometimes this social justice thing gets kind of mixed up with wealth, kind of like when you talk about redistributing things. I guess the first thing or the first fear a lot of us have is my stuff. You want to take my stuff and give it to someone who didn't work as hard as I did to get my stuff. And I think that's kind of an unfortunate way to look at it. Maybe that's a logical and reasonable conclusion from the way governments behave sometimes, but maybe rising above that a little bit, we could look at if this is God's stuff and I'm a steward, then where's it supposed to go? And am I supposed to have a whole lot more than my neighbor or not? I'm not answering that question. I'm just saying that is a question to kind of ponder. The second thought that I had is when we talk about this, you can look at it from the standpoint of the recipient or from the standpoint of the giver. So I'll be the giver. I like being the giver, sort of.
When you had it out here.
Figure out the motivations and the attitudes and the worthwhileness of recipients. if I contribute or push for or vote for a system that says we're going to put these this stack of benefits out into the public, and we're not going to worry so much about what people do with it. In other words, if someone chooses to abuse it and they end up starving, then I could be comfortable saying, well, that's really sad, but the system did not treat them wrongly.
Mhm.
So where I get concerned is where you might say that you can look at systemic problems where it doesn't matter how hard someone works or what color their skin is or anything else, whatever. Actually, I didn't say that the way I meant to, but some people will never, no matter how hard they work, be able to be successful. Well, to me, that's what social justice means, is in what areas can you leave it up to people to succeed or fail on their own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you were talking about how hard people work, and I mean, to be honest, there are people who work a lot harder than I do, who have a lot less than I do. And I'm not saying that we need to try and equalize, how much stuff you have is somehow a direct function of how hard you work. I mean, I think we have to realize that some people are born with more, gifts than other people and that kind of thing that happen to have marketable value. But, it's the kind of the question that I think about is, if you imagine, this is what I typed, that's what I wrote to Gino. Imagine the sort of the worst case. Like, you have somebody who is not very smart. They're not very physically strong. They're not well-spoken. They're not attractive. Maybe they screwed up in high school. They never graduated, whatever. Like the least marketable, employable person you can think of. If they decide, I want to work hard, I'm willing to work hard, like what should their situation be? And we kind of decide this with the systems that we set up, right? The programs that we put into place, the way we kind of structure, regulations and so on and so forth. Like I think about that person and I'm like, well, where should they be? Because that, if in this hypothetical, they're potentially working hard and they're doing the right things, and that person could potentially struggle to, deal with an illness, or to support a family, or to educate their, children beyond the public stage of education. So I don't know. Oh, somebody's in the room. Admit. Hey, JP's.
A good example of what you were talking about is we look at the salaries made by athletes, for example. Mm-hmm. Tremendous salaries. And I can't throw a baseball that hard. I can't shoot a free throw that well. I don't have the skills they have. No matter how hard I practice, mm-hmm. I will not be a professional basketball player. I am disadvantaged by my height of only 5'8". So you look at that and you try and figure out, should there be does social justice mean all of that has to be made equal? And I don't know that it necessarily says that.
No, I don't think it does. I think there may be a few people who are saying that, but my sense of it isn't necessarily that most people see that as a necessary part of social justice to me. But I think a lot of people are focused on people at the bottom who not only don't have the baseball throwing ability or the free throw shooting ability, but don't have the education, maybe aren't in a position to really get that education. You know, it's like, how do you want the least of these to sort of be in society? Like, because there's always going to be people who are the least productive members of society, not necessarily because they're not working, but because they're just, you know, they can't throw a baseball hard, and they're not super bright, and they're not, you know, all the different traits that somebody could have that would make it hard to provide for themselves.
Kathy's got her hand up.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry, I'm just gonna keep holding it. So yeah, I don't think that's like, I don't think social justice would say that's not fair and everybody should be given that equally. But on the other hand, in one of Gary's emails that he sent, he said that he found out that one of the nurses that he works with, who's been there about the same amount of time, who has the same amount of experience than him, or more experience, actually makes less than him, and she's a woman. That's wrong. You know, like, is it wrong that he gets paid more? I think it's wrong that he gets paid more. If it's equal, if it's the same, except for he's a man and she's a woman, I don't think that that's fair. I feel like that it's not social justice, right? Like, that's not equal. That's just a counter example of that. You know, like, those things are equal, right? They have the same skills, they can do the same job, and she gets paid less.
So here's an example of what I was talking about. So I can agree with Kathy, and I can say, yes, if she's getting paid less because she's a woman, then that is unjust. But at the same time, I can say, I can wonder, and I can ask, and I can say, well, are we really sure she's getting paid less because she's a woman, or is it because she hasn't negotiated as aggressively with her employer as Gary has, or some other explanation?
Gary has negotiated nothing. He is not a negotiator. He is like the nurse and not a businessman.
That's one of the objections that people might raise on a thing like that. And if you have that objection, you can still agree with the person and say, yes, I mean, if that's what's going on, then I agree with you. That's wrong. But I don't know if that's what's going on. And then you can kind of dig into it and try and see, okay, let's think about, is that really what's happening? You know, that kind of thing. Like, you don't have to go into it and focus on the thing that you disagree about, which, you know, in this hypothetical, maybe I disagree on whether Gary's coworker is really getting paid less because she's a woman. I can instead say, yeah, I mean, if that's happening, then that's wrong. And start from there.
But then figure out some way to remove that barrier, to address that inequality without creating other barriers.
Yeah.
I know when I was younger and I worked for the federal government, at that point there was, you know, they'd recognized that minorities in the higher grades, there were less minorities, less women, and all that kind of stuff. And so they had actually created artificial barriers for white males. It was nearly impossible to get a promotion in the federal government as a white male, because all the promotions were going to women and minorities as they were trying to compensate for an imbalance that was perceived. And part of it was, they were looking at the percentage of women in technical jobs was smaller per capita than the population. But a lot of that was due to the fact that those weren't the jobs that the women wanted to go get. There were some who did. But instead they said, okay, well, we're going to make sure that if the population is 15% black, then we're going to have 15% black people working here. If it's 49% women, and we should have 49% women, regardless of what people strove for or chose. And it was very frustrating for, you know, to have, you know, experience what I termed anti-discrimination discrimination. And I think it was an example of an attempt at social justice that was not well thought out.
Yeah, there's definitely kind of brain dead ways to go about it. Um, and I think people have not always hit the mark with the kind of policies that they put into place. Like I can give an anecdote along those same lines. I have a friend from high school who is a contractor for the Census Bureau, and he basically writes reports for the Census Bureau. And he is, I forget, I think he has a 4-year contract, 2-year contract, I forget what it is, but it was coming up, and his contact on the inside, the person who signs the contract with him from the government side, was like, yeah, there's kind of an initiative to have more minority-owned businesses. So you submit your bid, but I'm letting you know that this other company is submitting a bid and they're minority-owned, and we may not take your bid. We may not be able to take your bid. But the guy said, but I shouldn't be telling you this, but you can probably subcontract for that company and continue to do the same work that you do now. Uh, you'll just be one of their employees, and you'll get paid less, and they'll get some of the money that we're going to end up, putting on the table for this contract. And he's, I wouldn't say he's progressive, but he's along those lines, and he was kind of frustrated by that. He's like, that's dumb. More so the fact that they would just suggest to him, hey, why don't you go become an employee of this company, and then we'll give the contract to them, and you can continue to do the work, for less. Anybody else? I had some new people join, so I want to hear from everybody.
So I think
Bree had her hand up.
Bree wanted to know, recap the topic for her to catch up.
We talked
Just
about,
you don't have to recap everything, but what's the specific question we're addressing? Because I have lots of thoughts and I don't want to take us.
well, we kind of started with a discussion of what we think people mean when they use the phrase social justice. So I read the first 3 paragraphs from the wiki page. I kind of talked a little bit about sort of a way to approach discussions with people where we look for areas of agreement, things that you can sort of affirm in someone's position that, yes, this is a thing that is wrong if it's going on, and then kind of start from there to kind of explore the rest of what someone believes. And then some different folks shared some different stories. Kathy talked about what her situation was growing up, and Jerry talked about some stuff. That's kind of a bad summary, but that's. But I want to hear your thoughts.
If I speak, what should I say? What should I address?
Well, you could talk
In the
about,
universe of things I could say about social
you could
justice.
talk about, so you could talk about what it means to you, like when you say, like, if social justice is something that you think is important and that you are working towards, like, what does that mean? You could maybe talk about sort of how, to the extent that that's motivated by your faith, like how does that work? That kind of thing. I know that's kind of vague.
The part of this definitional problem, I guess I keep going back to, is when we use social justice in terms of money, we kind of go, I guess everybody's got their opinions about what that may mean when we're talking about money. On the other hand, if I say, what do you think about justice in a courtroom? Then I think, interesting, I think most of us would say something different about justice in a courtroom than we do about justice in our paycheck. And I have a quick anecdote. For many years, I worked for the state in a loan program for Texas veterans, not any veteran, only a Texas veteran. And so how do you prove you're a Texas veteran? Well, one of the alternatives was a sworn statement. And I remember talking to a guy on the phone once because he'd filled it out, and he had either messed up or he didn't know how to answer the question. And I called him. I said, the way you fill this out, you're not eligible. You don't get a loan from us. And he said, you mean if I'd put a different answer in that one blank, I'd get the loan? And I said, yeah. And he said, so you're punishing me for telling the truth? And I said, well, guess it kind of depends on how valuable you think truth is. What's more important to you, $15,000 or be a truth teller? Well, so that always kind of stuck with me, that so many times virtue and honesty, integrity is not a big enough incentive, sadly. It kind of comes down to, well, this person is making more money than me and I work harder. I've kind of thought, I hope this doesn't sound too socialistic. Why do doctors working in the same hospital with nurses get paid so much more than nurses? It's not clear to me, in all cases, that the expertise that the doctor has is helping me more than the expertise the nurse has. It just kind of depends from time to time. And I know doctors have to spend a lot of money to get their education, but there are probably a lot of nurses that if they'd had easy access to medical school could be doctors, And so what are we talking about? I guess I go back to, maybe the job of social justice is to make sure that in any defined area, you're offering things equally to everybody. What they do with it's up to them.
Kathy, you want to give an amen to that? Gary should be making doctor money.
Amen. Yes.
Well, and maybe the medical school shouldn't cost so much.
Yeah.
Right.
But shoulds are, I think using the word should that's always sticky.
I was listening to a podcast today. It was a legal podcast, and it was talking about how many people have access to a lawyer who can avoid the death penalty for them, and how many other people don't have access to that kind of influence, and they're on death row. And you can. I don't want to make a big deal out of that, but but the statistics are there. An awful lot of people start off with a public defender, say, who is overworked and can't give the kind of attention that other people get. So now we have a real disparity over who goes to jail or who gets executed that has nothing to do with really the merits of their case.
So that reminds me of something that I can share that I think falls in line with this, something I was just thinking about yesterday. Just driving from our house over to Crestview area and passed under 183 and saw the people living in tents. And I started thinking about, all the different discussion, myriad discussions that are going on in our city and elsewhere about that situation. And like I often do, I started debating some imagined person in my head and just thinking, we don't like that. We don't like that there are people living in tents underneath 183 or elsewhere that are, piling up trash, have been brought porta potties so that, depending on your perspective on it, think, why are we enabling this situation to be more comfortable than it was, perhaps? And my next thought was, well, if we set up rules so that we make it really hard for them to stay there, like we get rid of all their stuff every month or however often we were doing that before, the TxDOT was doing that before, and they are living somewhere else, the problem isn't fixed. We can just ignore it easier. And the argument that, well, crime goes up if they're spread out all along 183 from Cameron to Anderson Mill, crime all along that corridor goes up. But if they're forced to be in some other neighborhood or some other place? Is it that the crime goes up, or and we have Courtney here, so she can maybe actually respond to this with data, or is it that the crime is just more equitably spread out across the stretch of 183? I don't know. These were the things that I was thinking and questions that I was imagining asking a group like this. So here I am. And then I started thinking, well, and I think this is maybe the connection to like social justice. So do we want it to be that if I can afford to pay more for my house, I should be able to buy a safe place? And that's the social environment we want. So crime is higher in places where people are poor. And that's just the society we're in. If you have more money and you can buy a house somewhere where there isn't crime, then that's the way it is. Or do we want a place where you're not necessarily condemned or going to be experiencing more crime just because you live in a place where the houses cost less? So anyway, I live on the east side of 35, near Runberg and 183. And so, but in a very suburban looking neighborhood. I live in the same neighborhood that Gino and Elizabeth Huss live in. So we have the Runberg, some of the Runberg crime issues, but not the same kind of Runberg apartments or other poverty issues in our neighborhood. So it feels like not just a theoretical, about 183 and out there, but also it's the question that gets raised a lot in our neighborhood. Do we allow the homeless camp that's down by the bridge, or do we want them to move somewhere else because they're raising crime in our neighborhood? We'd rather them raise crime in someone else's neighborhood. So I don't know. I mean, to me, those are questions of social justice and what we think about social justice would guide the decisions that we make about how to deal with those issues.
Yeah, one thing I would say, just a random comment on that, is that I think we, and I'm not saying that you aren't thinking this, but I mean, there's some stuff that we live in a broken world, and we can ameliorate the way things are to some extent, but we're never going to get to the way things should be. And that doesn't mean you don't try to make things better, but like the specific instance you gave of there being higher crime in like low income areas, that's probably the case everywhere, I would think. Not just in the US, but like, I don't think anybody has totally fixed that or found a way around that. But I think we could maybe do better than we do. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's different things, different approaches that would make that less the case.
And I think that's what I'm saying. What we think about social justice would help us make those decisions. Do we say social justice doesn't matter or whatever, and this is the way it is? Or do we say, well, I'm going to try, I think it shouldn't be that way. I think it should be a different way. And I'm going to make choices, who I vote for, the charities that I give to, where I volunteer, etc., to make a difference in that direction. But fundamentally, it's a question of which way do I think is the way I want it to be. Mm-hmm. And we often don't get down to that fundamental question. Do I want it is this just the way it is and I'm okay with that? I'm just going to live in this way that things are broken? Or am I going to look at it and say, I think it should be different, and I'm going to do something different to try and make it different as much as I can in my little life?
Well, and I think also it bears noting that most of us are kind of making this decision from a position of luxury. Like, all of our situations are different, but we're probably not in the most dire kind of scenario of the people that we're talking about. So we have the option to not care about stuff like this and kind of not really be that impacted necessarily. I'm not saying that that is a choice that people should make, but I'm saying it's a choice that we're in a position to make. And then you could even expand this globally. Like if you don't want to just think about situation in the US, I mean, just by virtue of being Americans, we're in a situation where we have the option to not care about, entire other countries that have it worse than we do. You can take it all, you can kind of go to different levels.
Yeah, when you said that, it made me think, so I'm the president of the organizing board in Austin. And we had our strategic planning meeting last week, and we were talking about lots of companies are making diversity statements, or if they don't have one already. And I was bringing it up, and we were talking about it. And, on the board, I'm looking at the screen, and there's 7 white women, right? And so we're talking about diversity, which seems kind of funny because here we are all white. And we were talking about the diversity of our membership, and we are somewhat diverse, but not a ton. I mean, I think we have somebody who's gay. I think that we have somebody who's 2 people who are Black, and maybe 2 people who are Hispanic out of like 40 something people. Mm-hmm. And I was talking about this, because we were talking about, well, how do we get more diverse? How do we draw people in? And I said, it's kind of tricky because this is a luxury job. Like the job that I provide is a luxury service. I can't afford me. And so it's not something that's equal to everybody. Like I don't have health insurance. I work super flexibly. I get paid a lot per hour, but I don't have a ton of hours. And I have a husband who works full-time, basically 2 full-time jobs with health insurance. So I can do this job, but it is a luxury. It's not something that everybody could do. And so when you said that, it made me think that, like, yeah, it's like we have luxuries that we don't even think that we have. Like I'm thinking I'm helping my family by using this gift that God gave me, that I'm really good at, to make money for my family. And that's true, but it's not an opportunity that everybody might have. And so I don't want to take that for granted.
So would you be upset if people said you're discriminating against men because there's no men in your organization?
There are a few men. I don't think I'm discriminating against them. I think there are men in my organization who make way more money than I do.
I think that the idea, at least for me, that if there were a barrier there such that men couldn't compete, and that's why they're not there, that would be a social injustice. Yeah. But if there are not men there because they don't choose to be there, mm-hmm. It's not where they find their talents, it's not where they find their joy, mm-hmm. Then I don't see that there's an injustice there. And that's one of the things I think we need to look at when we're trying to identify where social injustice is the barrier artificial?
Well, I think, like, to answer that question, when I was thinking about, are we diverse? I wasn't thinking men, honestly, because I feel like this job, I'm not saying that there aren't organized men. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying the tendency to want to do this job, I would say the vast majority is somebody who's a woman, right? Like, I want to go into a woman's house and I want to help her find some calm in the chaos. Probably men don't normally think that they want to do that. and there are men clients too, but I was thinking more like, why aren't there more young African-American women doing this job? And it's because they can't support their family doing this job. It's not a luxury that they might have to do it. Did I do something wrong? No, but I can say out loud, like in our group, I say all the time, like, we're better together. Like, our organizers, we're better together. We're technically competitors, but we don't feel that way. Like we are colleagues because we don't really have other colleagues. Like, I don't have a workplace where I go to and I'm with other people. We are our colleagues. So we're always saying we're better together. And I guess I'm just thinking, like, what are we missing by not having more diverse fleshing out of what organizing looks like? You know, like, it's my own one little world. And, you know, when I think about just my fellow organizers, we all have totally different ideas. Like, we could talk for hours about what type of hanger is best. Like, really? Like, we really could do that. You don't want to have that conversation with us.
I can't even imagine.
I think that self-examination is good.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you say, okay, I've noticed this disparity, so should we examine and make sure that we don't have a blind spot where we have placed a barrier that shouldn't be there?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
So it's good to be self-retrospective, you know, and think about that. It could be that there isn't a barrier and it just is the way it is. But it's always good to examine if there's a barrier. And of course, the problem with blind spots is you can't see them.
Yeah. I would say
Jay looks like he's about to say something and then froze.
Then I froze. I think it's good on stuff like this to have I guess, just as a posture, to sort of have a posture of discerning openness. So if I'm interacting with someone who feels strongly about this and they have an injustice that they're concerned about, you know, I want to go into that conversation with a willingness to hear them out, I guess, as opposed to just a reflexive kind of, you know, defensive posture. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna disagree with them, so, you know, I'm on edge. I'm ready to disagree. But when I'm saying that, I'm not saying that you should sort of be open to anything and just agree with everybody. I mean, think critically, for sure. But I feel like a lot of people get hung up on sort of the baggage that goes along with this particular term. And there is a lot of baggage, I would say. There's a lot of things that people have legitimate disagreement with. Like you mentioned, sort of the extreme version. But the tendency is it just sort of shuts down conversation, and it prevents any kind of nuanced examination of what may be legitimate injustices. Like, if you know, it's like if you maybe people are overzealous in identifying injustice, but it's probably the case that some of the things that have been identified are legitimate, you know, and are worth thinking about, and maybe worth changing, you know, systems and structures to kind of correct. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it. And I know that's vague, but, you know, I try to sort of express something that I think is applicable to all of us, no matter where we fall on the particular issues, like specific issues. It's more of a, how do you approach it in a relational sense, like with a hypothetical person that you're talking to that maybe isn't a believer or is, in a way that you can come together and potentially agree on some commonalities and not come away angry.
Well, the other thing that struck me is that for a lot of these things, I think we need to come back periodically and revisit the question. Because things change. Like, you know, Kathy was saying right now we have almost no people of this demographic. A year from now, that might look different.
Sure.
You know, I think for all of us who are on this chat, the idea, it used to be you got a college degree that really helped your marketability in the job market, et cetera. That's not always the case anymore. You know, we've got lots of really well-educated people out there who can't get jobs in their profession. That has changed over time. And so what the answer is right now is not necessarily going to be the answer 6 months from now, a year from now, maybe even a month from now, especially with all of the chaos that we have because of pandemic issues. You know, that's really thrown a monkey wrench into things for a lot of people. So the idea that we need to revisit questions.
So Jay, I liked your comment about wanting to intentionally be open, non-defensive listeners to criticism. And you know, one of the comments that came out with the riots was, you don't listen to us unless we're being violent. And I think there's some truth there, because we have a tendency to say, well, instead of rioting, why don't you just have a discourse? But then we don't listen when they have a discourse. And so they've tried that, been there, done that, and now they're trying the riot thing. And while I don't think rioting is the right thing, I can understand the frustration of not being listened to. And so I really applaud your intent to be intentionally open and not defensive.
Yeah, I just think as believers, we should strive as much as possible. And I'm not saying I always do this. I mean, I'm certainly not perfect in this regard. You can ask Kelly. But try not to get hung up on like sort of hot button terms, like social justice or, you know, whatever the other kind of catchphrases of the day. And don't assume that you know exactly what that means when it can mean a lot of different things to different people. It's weird that talking about this. It's almost like, you know, I remember Gino has given a sermon on kind of how to talk to people who are far away from God. And I'm not saying that people who support justice are far away from God, but it's kind of a similar deal where you want to be a listener. You want to, you know, not be defensive if they are, even if they're kind of like offensive towards you, and you know, pick at your position. Anyway, that's kind of a funny parallel there. Maybe it's just a good way to relate to people in general.
Yeah, I was going to say too that, and also just not assuming that your experience has been their experience.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I was on a call this last week with a friend. She's African American. She's a believer, and she hosted several women on her on Facebook, and we just had a conversation. And I think just us being willing to listen to her, that her experience in our America is not her experience in our America, really did a lot of healing in her heart. Like she just felt listened to. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we want? Like, we want to be listened to, and we want to be heard. And if something's hurting us, we want somebody to help us stop the hurting. And I think a part of that is, you know, like you said, listening, and then like also like just being humble. And you can't know their experience. Like, you didn't know my experience, right? Like, yeah, anyways, I agree. I think it's good.
I'm going to shut up and let other people talk.
I was going to say, we've got several people who haven't had a chance to speak yet. We've only got a few minutes left.
The Daniels are just laughing at us in the
Lynn,
background
you need to
there.
unmute.
Oh, who's muted? I can unmute. I can ask to unmute.
Lynn.
Ask. to-
Okay,
oh, there you go.
you can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So listening to you, Kathy, about what you just said about your friend hosting a few friends on Facebook, reminds me that there is an African-American woman who worked, she still does work for the Diocese of Texas, the Episcopal Diocese. She's a counselor and she's a facilitator of hard conversations. And Thursday night, she's going to be doing an enormous Zoom call about that very topic. People talking about racial injustice. And evidently, my friend who is a counselor had only really good things to say about her. Her name is Terry J, J-A-E. And she did one for teenagers on Sunday.
Cool.
Yeah. So looking for what you were describing with your friends on Facebook, it's happening. It's happening in big formats. She's been to Portland and Seattle, and she's from Houston. So anyway, that's it's a resource.
I was trying to look her up while you were talking.
I think it's Terri.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. That's cool though.
Courtney, were you trying to say something? I saw you flash on and off a couple times. You're muted.
Ask to unmute. I'll also ask Kevin to unmute. I don't know if it actually does anything, but I click the button. I'm gonna go get my charger for my laptop.
Courtney just wrote something in the Zoom group chat. Did y'all just read it?
Right.
Yeah.
She's constrained by her position.
Yep.
I'm back.
So I agree with, I agree 100% with the emphasis on listening and listening with openness. And I hear what you're saying, Jay, is it's more in discussing the issue among other issues, the way that we approach talking about the idea of social justice. But I do think that getting down to like these conversations, like that you were just mentioning having, Kathy, that there is the notion that that social justice goes beyond that to actually taking action. And I was really struck by what you said about it last time, Jay, about social justice being, not just charity, which was a lot of the stories that we were sharing, personal charity, but also taking actions that in a Christian point of view would be motivated by love, motivated by believing that every human is created in the image of God, that God is a God of justice and desires justice and is opposed to injustice in the world. And that even beyond the interpersonal listening, that there is a place for action. And I feel like I'm in a place where my tendency is to be very relational, interpersonal. I want to listen and feel with a person. And I feel like I'm in a place now where I'm being challenged about taking action, but I'm also reflecting on ways that maybe I have taken action that I didn't think about as being some big important action, or certainly not activist in any way, but maybe those actions, like where I send my kids to school, actually make a difference.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't trying to say that that's not something people should be doing.
No,
No,
I wasn't coming against you. I was just adding to the conversation of
yeah.
what is social justice, or hoping that I did. I was trying to.
Yeah, I guess sort of if I were to maybe sort of have a final statement for the discussion, it would be, you know, each of us, I don't think I'm overstepping here to say that God wants each of us to be cognizant of injustice, and to not intentionally shut our eyes. So I think each of us needs to decide what we think that means, and then recognize that there can be institutional injustices. We can look at recent, last 50 years in the US, and I don't think it's too hard to imagine that, yes, there can be institutional injustice. And then be open to the possibility that there may be things that we should be trying to change. And I think that that's something that each person needs to think through and pray through. And we may not all come to the same answer. But I think that as believers and as people who love our fellow men and women, that it's incumbent upon us to do that. And that I'm not saying that everybody needs to go out and be an activist. I'm just saying that I don't think we can totally punt on the issue of potential systemic injustice and really be where we need to be with God, because I think it's something that God cares about. To the extent that there is injustice at that level, I think it's something that God hates. So anyway, that's kind of where I would leave it. Jim, do you want to say anything? My co-host.
No, thanks. Thanks. I think it's been good.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming, guys. I want to honor the time slot that Gino told me to stay within. Yeah, thanks for coming and thanks for participating.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for facilitating.
Yes,
Oh,
thanks,
you're
Jay.
welcome.
Bye.
Oh, and do check out that link from the CRC. I thought it was really good. If you have the time. Bye.
So Jay, you can record the chat, save the chat, maybe put that into the Realm post.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? I guess, who's left? I don't want to post it in there if anybody doesn't want it to be made.
Well, go ahead and save it so you don't lose it. You can decide to post it later.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Matt's usually the one that uploads them.
Okay.
Well, I was thinking put the chat, maybe not in YouTube, but on the Realm post.
Okay.
That keeps it in the family.
Well, I'll ping Gino and Matt and see what they think, and then if they give me the go ahead, then I'll put it in there.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Jay.
Bye.